My dad worked 3 jobs to pay for my college, but I only found out the real sacrifice he made after he passed away. My dad was always tired when I was growing up. He worked construction during the day, drove for a delivery service in the evenings, and did weekend handyman jobs. I used to get annoyed that he'd fall asleep during my high school basketball games or couldn't help with homework because he was always working. When I got into college, he insisted on paying for everything. "You just focus on your studies," he'd say. "That's your only job." I knew money was tight, but I was 18 and selfish. I assumed he'd figure it out like parents always do. During college, I'd come home and complain about my professors, my roommate, how hard my classes were. Dad would just nod and ask if I needed anything. I'd roll my eyes when he'd get excited about my grades or want to hear about my day. I was too cool for his enthusiasm. After graduation, I got a good job in marketing and moved across the state. I visited maybe twice a year, always making excuses about being busy with work or my social life. Dad never complained, just said he was proud of me and asked when I'd visit next. Last year, Dad had a heart attack at 58. Sudden and massive. He was gone before I could get to the hospital. Going through his things afterward, I found a folder in his desk labeled college fund. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and a notebook where he'd tracked every penny for 4 years. That's when I learned the truth. Dad had taken out a second mortgage on the house to pay for my freshman year. The weekend handyman jobs weren't just for extra cash. They were paying for my meal plan. He'd been skipping lunch at his construction job to save money for my textbooks. But the notebook was what broke me. In his careful handwriting, he'd written down every expense. Tuition, $4,200. Took extra Saturday jobs for 3 months. Dorm fee, $800. Sold motorcycle. Books, $350. Can fix car myself instead of mechanic. On and on for 4 years. Things I never even thought about, he'd calculated and planned for. There was an entry that said, pizza money, $40 per month, where he'd budgeted for me to order food with friends. The worst part was a section labeled emergency fund, where he'd save $500 each semester in case I needed to come home or had an emergency. That money came from him working Christmas and New Year's instead of being home with family. But the entry that destroyed me was from my senior year. Graduation trip with friends, $600. Picked up holiday shifts driving, worth it to see him happy. I remember that spring break trip to Florida with my buddies. I'd casually mentioned wanting to go, and Dad had quietly handed me cash the next week. I never asked where it came from or thanked him properly. I just took it and went partying with my friends while he worked double shifts during holidays. At the bottom of the notebook, in his shaky handwriting from his last few months, he'd written, "Investment paid off. My boy graduated. Proudest day of my life." The house was falling apart. The roof needed repairs he couldn't afford. His truck was held together with duct tape and prayers. His work boots had holes that he'd covered with electrical tape. He'd sacrificed everything to give me opportunities he never had. And I'd been too selfish and ungrateful to even notice. The funeral was packed with people whose lives Dad had touched. His co-workers talked about how he'd brag about me constantly. My son, the college graduate, he'd tell anyone who'd listen. His boss said Dad had turned down a promotion that required Sunday work because that's when I call my boy. I spoke at the service, but I couldn't get through it. I tried to tell everyone what an amazing father he was, but the words felt hollow. How do you sum up a man who literally worked himself to death to give his ungrateful kid a better life? Cleaning out his bedroom, I found a frame on his nightstand with my graduation photo and a copy of my first job offer letter. He'd kept it there for 3 years, probably looking at it every night before falling asleep, exhausted from working multiple jobs. I called him maybe once a month. He'd light up every time, asking about my job, my apartment, if I was eating enough. I'd give him 5-minute updates and make excuses to hang up quickly. Now I'd give anything for one more of those calls. The house is mine now, but it feels empty without his presence. I found myself fixing the roof he couldn't afford to repair, using money I make at the job as sacrifices made possible. I started a scholarship fund in his name for kids whose parents work multiple jobs. It doesn't bring him back, but maybe it honors what he believed in. That education is worth any sacrifice. I just wish I could tell him thank you. I wish I could tell him that I finally understand what love looks like. It looks like a tired man falling asleep in bleacher seats because he worked all day but wouldn't miss his son's game. It looks like skipping lunches and selling motorcycles and working holidays so your kid can have opportunities you never did. It looks like giving everything and asking for nothing except a phone call once in a while from the person who means everything to you. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took losing you to realize what I had.